Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and we have Gerald Clark with us again from GeraldClark77.com. Now, Gerald has been a fan favorite. He's one of my favorite people to talk to, one of the most knowledgeable individuals on the planet today, literally, when it comes to these Sumerian translations and the Anunnaki, not just the genealogy of the gods, but also when you read some of these translations and Sumerian texts that have been around for, some of them go back thousands of years, the connections to what you read in the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Gnostic scriptures, they all intertwine at some level, in my opinion. And that's why it's good to get to some of these older texts that predate the Bible. And today we're going to discuss Atlantis. We're going to discuss Thoth. We're going to discuss how Atlantis affects our world today. And we're also going to get into some of the dark side of things, the underbelly that's been around for tens of thousands of years. And many people are finally just starting to wake up to it. So, Gerald, it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that you're working on a movie right now. You've got new books in production as well. And it's just great to talk to you. How the heck are you?
I'm really doing great, Rex. Warm welcome to you and all your listeners. And it's about time we have another conversation, I can tell, based on our warm-up, okay?
Absolutely. And as I told you off the record, I'm the kind of person that if I don't agree with somebody at first, but I want to, I got like something in my mind saying, hey, maybe you should do more research on that, I will go out and either prove or disprove that person's theory and hypothesis. And when I've been reading all these ancient Sumerian translations that have been from people that have gone to Oxford University, not just one person, we're talking teams of 10 people, and just the storyline of these Sumerian texts it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Kind of like when I got into the Sumerian kings list that shows a timeline of 275,000 years of dynasties. Some of these dynasties last for 48,000 years. Some of them last longer than that. And one thing about the Sumerians is they were extremely good at leaving detailed scribes of what happened in their history and their surroundings. So,
actually, you can let me chime in on that story about the Sumerian kings list. It actually turned out to be one of those things that was seminal in my unraveling path of this story. I mean, if you're going to read the history of an ancient race, oftentimes you want to get it from the kings and the rulers, because they're the ones that had the scribes that could read and write and keep records. So otherwise, you didn't get the story at all. Well, it turns out that the Sumerian kings list is really quite bizarre. And the one that most people reference was from the historian Berossus, who lived in Babylon about 330 to 260 BC, okay? So he was around at the same time as Alexander the Great, who was the son of Philip from Macedonia, right? So it's very, very interesting. Anyway, he actually are you looking up Berossus or, okay, the Sumerian kings list? Yeah, he's probably listed in there somewhere. Anyway, Berossus recorded this for the Babylonians and other people to be able to read it. And his Sumerian kings list was so appealing to me that I had to take a trip to Washington, D.C. to get the most, official version that I could get my hands on that Berossus had written. So I found myself at in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress to actually get a copy of that, which I still have to this day. And once I saw that myself and saw that the kings from Sumer were listed in a chronologic order up to and including a flood where it started to look like a whole new epic after that, that the story of these Sumerian kings who were also overlapping with some of the gods and demigods that we were seeing in their main literature, like the Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh that you just recently went over, was stunning to me. For instance, the very first ruler on the Sumerian kings list, Alulim, he was king when kingship was lowered to the earth. He was the king in Eridu, which we know is Enki's city, right? The Earth Station 1 city that's right there at the Tigris and Euphrates, where it empties into the Persian Gulf. So all of a sudden, it became very, very real to me looking at these Sumerian kings lists. And like you said, they served for a very long time. How could that be possible? Are we misinterpreting the way the dates were set by Berossus? And I say we aren't, because they listed it in shars. Many other documents talk about their term, a shar, being 3,600 years. And when you multiply the 8 shars, for instance, in the Sumerian kings list for the very first one, you can see that's 28,800 years. And you can do that for every single one of those first 8 or 9 kings in that list that ruled for a very long time. Then the Great Flood came, right? And by the way, I did the math, and that flood was not Noah's flood. That was a different one, because you'll see that there were actually beings around the time of the flood that still show up in the kings list that we can track. For instance, Gilgamesh himself was the son of Nisim, who was a pure blood Anunnaki, according to the records, king of Uruk, and his father, Lugalbanda, is also on the Sumerian kings list. So Gilgamesh is on there, and his father. So it's very, very consistent with the records when you start looking at the Sumerian kings list going, is this real? Because it's crazy. And I'll shut up. I will let you chime in on that one, see what you think about that.
Well, as far as the Sumerian kings list, here's what I think about it. When you read these dynasties that go for 50, 60,000 years, any dynasty that would go for over 40 years, I mean, with modern, what we think about with modern science, basically, you think it's crazy. You think it's impossible. And then when you find out that the DNA has actually been designed to age and that can be turned around, and when you read about the Sumerians and the Watchers and the fallen angels and all these different scriptures that talk about how there was all sorts of genetic manipulation that took place, and also when you read the Epic of Gilgamesh and it talks about how the Anunnaki, how Enlil and this dynasty from heaven, essentially from the stars, creates man in that specific form to not only provide gold for them, but also to provide food for them. And then they start getting all these new technologies and abilities that are given to them from the fallen angels, if you look at it from a religious standpoint. But in reality, I see it as just a race of beings that are far advanced with certain technologies. So when somebody sees that, they interpret it a specific way. And, for them, that might be a sin. So they tell a human, oh, that's a sin. Or, oh, these fallen angels came down and had sex with women, so we banned them to hell forever. Well, in reality, maybe it was just that, these beings saw these earth women as beautiful, and they figured they were close enough, kind of like Star Trek, where Captain Kirk's like, hey baby, how you doing? And the leader said, no, I'm not playing ball. That's not how it's supposed to be. You need to stick within your own bloodline, whatever, kind of like you have these archetypes and stuff. So it pissed them off. So what do? Well, let's just flood everything. Everybody out and start over.
I got to jump in right there. The leader that was here, rank 50, that was the head of the council, the commander, actually raped a woman named Sood, who was a nurse, and then married her to try to cover it up. Okay, listen, they were not all of them were being dastardly to the humans. Okay, but some of them were. Okay, and by the way, I challenge you to look around the human populace and their fallen state relative to sexual energy and how it's affecting children, animals, other creatures. I mean, you talk about the Anunnaki breeding with human women. Well, humans are breeding with goats and animals and every other damn thing on the internet. It's disgusting, and I want to say that right now. So you point the finger, people, at the Anunnaki. Look at your own culture.
You know what their excuse to that will be, don't you?
Monkey see, monkey do.
Cornholio. No, their excuse to that will be, well, they were manipulated by the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki put their warlike DNA in them. So
yeah. Well, listen, I don't have RH minus, so I must have come from a monkey. So I'm allowed to be a bobo monkey, and that means I'm not responsible for what I do to people that are abusing children, just like they're not responsible for their acts if they're over the age of 7.
Well, it's terrible. I mean, it's horrific. Not only that, but then you look at the foods that they're putting out there, the medicines, the stuff that they force children at birth with vaccines. It's sick all the way around, Gerald. And you're right. You look at these factory chicken farms where chickens fall, they can't even walk a couple of feet and they collapse in their own footprint. They never get to see light because they're told that if they never see light, they might get an extra half pound out of them. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And so was this kind of stuff going on before the flood? Did the flood actually take place to wipe that away, or did the flood take place because they wanted to get rid of that Enlil wanted to get rid of people because he felt that they were too intelligent and they were being too much of a pain in the ass?
Well, not only intelligent, it looks like the real conflict that there were many layers of the conflict between Enki and Enlil. Territorial, inheritance, just way of being. One of them is a commander and one of them is a scientist creator. Okay, they were polar opposites. So I think Enlil actually felt very, very threatened by the fact that Enki put his own genetic seed into these primitive workers. I mean, that's like breeding your own test tube army, right? So he did not know the extent to which these beings were going to have capabilities to usurp his authority, and every commander thinks like that. Okay, it's terrible, but it's true. Okay, so the humans, I think, took a lot of the brunt of his anger and his distrust for his brother, continuously blamed for thwarting his command authority and brutalizing the slaves to get their resources and their work done faster. And yeah, they were getting gold, they were bringing food, they were doing everything after a while. Everything you can name, just like today. Everything that humans do to create services and goods ultimately are serving the people who established what the gold standard, what the currency standard is. And they decided that was gold. And they did that on purpose. And I've talked about this many times before. We don't have to go there again. But so we got through. So you got exposed to the Sumerian kings list, and you saw Alulim, the king, was the first one in the city of Eridu. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, that's another thing too, is when you look at some of these names, it's fascinating when you find those specific letters and sounds in other words also. And that's one of the things I want to ask you. So first it was, as far as the king's list, I don't think the first king was Anu, right? It was
no, it was if the one on earth, when you read right in the first of the Sumerian kings list, it says when kingship was lowered to earth, okay, the very first time, that was at the city of Eridu. You probably got to let's see, where does it start giving you the text? Scroll down, see if you can actually see the there Alulim, see that right there?
Yep.
He served 8 SARs, and that's multiply 8 times 3,600, you'll get that. He was in Eridu. See, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, and they I don't know if they pronounce that G. But if you go to the Etsy documents on the digital archives, perusing, look up Eridug in there. You'll be fascinated and read about Enki's city and all the stuff that was going on. And there's a lot of stuff about him and his half-sister Ninmah or Ninhursag that shows up in those documents. Okay, so there's your list, and you can see 28,000, 36,000. And then Eridu fell, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tabira. Bad Tabira was a metal.
That was given to the mistress.
Well, that was the metallurgy center where they were processing ore. Is Bad Tabira. That's one of the 7 pre-diluvial cities, by the way. Is Bad Tabira.
But what I said is correct too. It's funny that they named it Bad Tabira, because one of the translations that I just read was where Enlil gave that specific land to his mistress. And it was interesting because I don't know if you heard that text from that I did a translation on, and it kept repeating the same thing over and over. And somebody made a point that must have been a song actually at one point in time.
No, actually it was their literary style. They would oftentimes repeat a story, and they would, if it was really important, they'd add one element to it. They'd repeat it all over, and then add one more element to it just to add emphasis. It's almost like a building crescendo. It was a weird style. I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of it, but they do that often.
Extremely high sex drives they have. You read the translations and this
oh my, yeah, it was crazy. It really looked like a genetic seeding war going on, trying to get control of the progeny that were going to be in this particular region, that was going to establish occupancy so they could say, yeah, it's my seed over there, it's mine. All of that stuff going on. Absolutely.
So what was Atlantis like, Gerald?
Well, the best records we had were from Plato and the Timaeus and the Critias. And he gives a pretty detailed account of the materials used, what it looked like, some of the geometry and the structure. And he doesn't do a huge amount of justice to the dweller of Atlantis or Poseidon, but he does say that he was the chief deity of Atlantis and that it was essentially paradise. By the way, the word paradise is a Persian word, paradisia, that also was used and affiliated with Enki when he was called the Ahura Mazda in Iran or ancient Persia. And similarly, if you read about Eridug, E-R-I-D-U-G, in the Etsu documents, how do you pronounce that? E-T-C-L?
Yep.
Yeah. That's the Oxford Digital Archive of the cuneiform tablets. And by the way, there are still thousands of them that haven't been converted up there yet. But if you look up Eridug in there, you'll learn a lot about Enki, and that he also mentioned that he established paradise in Eridu, near the Garden of the Eden, where they did a lot of their experimenting with plants and had our Genesis story about Adam and Eve, right? Because he and his sister were involved with that. So it all kind of made sense. What are you pulling? Oh, you're pulling up ETCSL. Okay, ETCSL. I try to pronounce it as an acronym. Etzel.
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 Yeah,
Okay,
Etzel.
That's it. Yeah, it's a great place. But I have to warn people, if you don't have the exact search key in Etzel, you're not going to find it. It's really a pain in the butt that way. Put in ERIDUG, Rex, while you're in there searching. I see you're in there. Put in simple search, ERIDUG. Yeah. So you can go see about Enki's first city. This is the one we're talking about in the Sumerian. Yeah. So now start reading about all the stuff that's going on in Eridug, and scroll down and you'll see stuff referring to Enki and his half-sister there playing genetic games with humans, or with chimeras at first, okay? So you start reading down through that, and it's absolutely stunning. And actually to see the praise that was heaped on Enki, who was also known by Ea, Nudimmud, several other names, okay? So it's quite fascinating. If you read also, they oftentimes interchange the word for their home planet with the word heaven. So all of a sudden you got this huge crossover in the Bible, and it really rocks your head. Look at Enki in the world order C.1.1.3, the first, second, third, fourth one down. You can see on the second line, foremost in all the breadth of heaven and earth who received the powers in Eridu, the holy place. Enki, Lord of heaven and earth, praise. Okay, Enki was oftentimes viewed that way. I hardly ever read texts where he was being demonized unless it was by his brother. Maybe you've seen other stuff, but he was actually a good dude.
I got to jump in about that real quick, because I remember reading text that was on this website. It's actually I did the podcast about it on.
Yeah, I watched it. Yeah.
Well, he was talking about how when they actually took angel, they took one of the Anunnaki and sacrificed him for creating humans.
Yeah, that's the story I've told many times, and I don't mean to cut you off, but it actually wasn't an Anunnaki. It was one of the Ajiji. And his name was Yahwehla. He gives you his name in there. And I'm looking at this going, oh my God, was this guy like the most scheming, fallen one of them, and he's getting like capital punishment, and that's why they chose him? They don't tell how they went about choosing this one. But clearly,
doesn't that make you wonder?
Clearly he was already a biological slave. He was working in the mines. He was a subclass under the Elohim, which they called the Ajiji. And so this was the archetypal energy that he chose to recreate another version of that, which was us. So it all made sense to me, but at the same time, it freaking creeps me out that he was playing Frankenstein with some sort of energy taken out of a body, put in another one. Whoever's got that ability would be viewed as God in this order of reality, right? That's scary.
Well, it is. It's fascinating to think about. And then with all the research I've been doing lately into the cult of Saturn, the cube, the soul cube, and that's an archetype and symbology for the imprisonment of the soul. And I wonder sometimes if everything is a vibrational frequency, if the soul can be measured, and if there's a technology that's able to transfer that consciousness or that soul in essence, and I think the soul is consciousness.
Well, actually, I thought about that too, and it actually, I had to go back to the definition of soul and spirit and energy, and ultimately, if you're talking from a measurement standpoint, you're talking about energy. Okay, so these are things. This is something we can measure, and when you're talking about energy, we're usually talking about amplitude, wavelength, frequency, and phase. You know, especially if it's a sinusoidal type energy or frequency, which most things are. Right? As you know, most everything is a vibration, right? So that being said, we often say, not that it's the truth, as a model that consciousness is a quantized accumulation of energy at each of your ganglion or your nerve centers along your central conductor leading up to your head. So just from a battery standpoint, if you're standing out on the surface of the earth, your feet are touching the ground, which is at ground potential, and your head is at a higher potential, just like a lightning rod, okay? It's pretty much that simple. And if you look at how the difference in electrical potential is from the surface of the ground up to a higher point, the higher up you get from the ground to the top of the antenna, the more potential difference you have, right? So taller people are more electric than shorter people from that standpoint.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So you asked the question about consciousness. So if you accept that consciousness is energy or intelligence that's infinite, then the only way we have to measure that is from an energy model, whether it's light or anywhere on the electromagnetic spectrum, doesn't matter what it is, it's still energy, right? Actually, the real word for it is radiation. So anyway, so if that's the case, and we could measure those chakras at what energy is there, and we said, okay, well, what's the maximum amount you could have in each chakra? Don't we really have a way to say what's the highest state of consciousness, which we say is quantized energy that can be achieved? Do you see that, or is that too?
Not at all. Not at all. No, I'm going with you 100%. And on top of that, if the soul, I don't think the soul and the spirit are one and the same, and I'll tell you why. Because with the research that I've done on the occult, on mysticism, somebody that I really think had it spot on with most things was Franz Barden. And he talked about the soul and the spirit and how they're essentially two different things. So the soul maybe isn't infinite. The spirit, I feel, is. Yet I don't know how you can. I'm not intelligent enough right now. I don't have enough information right now to describe the two perfectly for you, for the audience and for you. But I do feel they're two different things.
Hey, while you're in these Edsel documents, scroll down and see if you can see where Enki and his sister Nidma and Nid Hartzog show up. I think they show up just a little bit farther down. Okay, go down a little bit more. Yeah, okay. Enki, and you did his Journey to Nibiru, right? I remember you did that one.
Yeah, they were getting wasted.
And then there's one about Enki and Inanna. You can see there. Scroll down just a little bit more and see. I thought there was a whole bunch of them about Enki and.
Here's Enki and Inanna.
Yeah, there's one about Enki and. I was looking for Nin Hartzog, but
okay.
I thought it showed up.
Is it Nin Hartzog Ishtar?
No. Inanna is Ishtar.
Okay.
And Inanna Hathor.
Well, while I'm looking for this, let me ask you a question because...
Yeah. I think you're getting close there. But anyway, you keep messing around looking at Enki and Ninba, and you'll see his half-sister. That's something I wanted to bring up. The females don't get talked about enough. Anu was married to Antu, his wife. And, and all these Sumerian kings you see were all males. But on the Anunnaki Council, there were 6 males and 6 females. And so we never really talk about the females as much as we should. And so the rank 60 was Anu, but at rank 55, just 5 below him was his wife Antu. Okay, then rank 50 was Enlil at some point, even though Marduk was rank 50 and others were as well. But his wife was on their council as well. So she was ranked 45, and then came Enki at 40, and Ninki or Damkina, his wife, that's mentioned in the Enuma Elish, she's on the council as well. So you start to see this. The even numbers were the male, and the odd numbers down to the number 5 were the females. And so it's important to remember them, because you'll see some of them in this list as you're reading about some of those. You go, and you can start putting that list of the main family members together in your head, because yes, the council changed, but at one point in time, if you take a snapshot, you can see all of them, how they were related. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you about Ishtar, because there's one part, and I think it was the Epic of Gilgamesh, where she goes up to Anu, her father, and she says, "Look, Gilgamesh won't hook up with me."
I know. I got to interrupt you for a second.
You keep interrupting me, man.
The genealogy table is in massive disagreement over Inanna and Ninmah, and this is I want to point this out, because there's a lot of confusion here. First of all, I don't believe Inanna is Anu's daughter. That's not what the record shows. She was Enlil's kid's daughter, not so. The fact that she was claiming Anu was her father, I had disagreement with that from the very beginning. But I know what you're saying, okay? So, but what I want to make clear is, and it's very important for the females, Inanna Hathor was not the same as Ninmah Isis. And when you go to the Egyptian record, you'll actually see 2 different pictures of them sitting side by side. They're not the same one, but but Inanna was oftentimes trying to take the sign of Venus and overcome the position of her nemesis, because they were different family lines, of Ninmah. So this is intentional. I want you to know that. Now I want to interrupt you, because I know you got a story to tell, but that's a very important point.
Well, that's fine. I was actually, where I was going was in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it talks about how Ishtar goes up to Anu and she's like, "Hey, Gilgamesh won't hook up with me, and if you don't give me the bull, if you don't give me that horn of the bull, I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to rip open the gates of hell." What is she talking about? Not only what's the gates of hell, what's the gates of hell, but what's that horn? And why is she so pissed off about Gilgamesh? He sounds like a player. That guy was a stud.
Yeah. She was used to getting her way. And she gets portrayed like in the Conan the Barbarian movie. Remember when he goes into some...
Oh, yeah.
And she turns into a witch and he throws her in the fire, all that thing?
Yeah.
That was an allusion to Inanna Hathor / Kali. You know, she was the goddess Kali in the Indus Valley. So, so anyway, so what was this bull? Actually, what she went and asked Anu for, she asked him to send her the bull of heaven. This is a being, okay, whose sign is Taurus. This was Enlil. This was his territory, okay. She asked Anu to have his son Enlil smite the Enkidu and Gilgamesh for what they did, right? Because they killed Humbaba in the Lebanon forest while they were trying to get access to the Anunnaki, who were taken off and landing in rockets at Baalbek, Lebanon. Okay, this is what was really going on. So Humbaba was this entity in the Epic of Gilgamesh that was there to guard the space facility that Gilgamesh and Enkidu encroached upon. So let's go back to the story. So the story is Inanna Hathor, and she was called Ishtar in other places. They're all the same being, okay? She basically had a temple in some of the cities that were Enlilite affiliated, including Uruk, okay? She had a temple there, and she had other temples all over the region. And she had, I don't know, I guess you would say she was selling sex magic to people to try to find ascension, that she'd lure them into her temple, have sex with them, and either they woke up and got happy or she killed them. It looked like she mostly just killed them, which was really dastardly. So it was like, oh yeah, come to me, I'll help you. And then you end up as a sacrifice. And Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, knew about her dastardly deeds and didn't want anything to do with her. And that's what he says in the account. You remember reading that, right?
Well, I remember Gilgamesh said, yeah, he didn't want nothing to do with her. Absolutely.
Well, that's why. He basically says in a nice way, why would I come and hang out with you? Because everybody that you lure into your nest.
He's the Black Widow.
Ends up, yeah, a victim of the Black Widow, dead. What are you, crazy? Well,
so why do we worship Easter now I mean, that goes to Ishtar essentially, doesn't it? So now let me ask you this too, because people change. You know, I mean, people can change. People can be an asshole when they're younger, especially, you know, some guys can be full of piss and vinegar when they're younger and want to get in fist fights. And when they get older, they might calm down and be like, hey, yeah, you know, it's kumbaya. I'll just kick back, relax. It's water off a duck's back. We're in this together. So don't you think that maybe these Anunnaki could be the same way? Because here's another thing that I got to throw out there. Like you brought up the darkness of humanity, and there are some dark people out there. Look at the way America was founded. They say, "Oh, the Constitution, freedom of religion," but if you're not worshiping Jesus, we're going to take your scalp because you're a Native American. You're going to burn in hell. What about the Inquisition and stuff like that? So there's so much nastiness that this country was founded on, so much darkness and literally blood and it's horrible to think about. I mean, the natives literally knew what was going on as far as keeping balance with Mother Nature. So why are we trying to destroy all that? Why is that all being just completely assimilated? And maybe now we have an opportunity to kind of make up for that and take the good from all these different cultures and stuff and actually utilize it for a win-win situation, not a win-lose situation.
I think we've always hoped for that all through mankind's history, a utopian reality. Because you know what, the spirit of humanity, I don't think is one that wants to avert someone else's path to make their own better. I don't think humanity's really like that at the core. I think they've been pushed that way by conquistador cultures, using them as fodder, dumbing them down, putting them through skewed perception prisons that make them think it's okay to kill someone in real life like it is in a video game.
Can the Anunnaki become nicer, like we, you know, like we have as a culture towards other cultures, I should say, or not we, you and me, but just towards, if you look at the way people look at other cultures now, at least here in America, it's kind of a multicultural thing where everybody's kumbaya for the most part. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. So do you think that these Anunnaki will ever be able to look past us as inferiors and, you know, just cannon fodder or just an animal for their consumption? Or do you think they'll be like, yeah, you know what, we can work together, and what I did in the past was maybe not, you know, maybe Enlil will say, shit, man, maybe I was too hard on these people. Maybe I do need to look at them as conscious souls and be, you know, in this with, I don't know, maybe I'm having a pipe dream here.
No, I think you touched on something really important. Was there ever a plan for the humans to be on par with their taskmasters? Was that ever in the plan? From a genetic standpoint, if you have a subset of your masters and part of it's not complete, then you will never evolve or be at the level of your masters. That's a given. Do you agree with me? If you've got clamp DNA, you can't be. You're only a subset of the whole.
Well, if you look at the holographic universe, every piece is essentially every sum is a part of the whole. So you could take
right. But what I'm saying is, if you didn't have the DNA to allow telepathy or some other advanced feature that is a brain feature, and you didn't have that genetic code, you're not going to have that. Okay. So I'm not saying it's there and it's suppressed. I'm saying genetically, if they gave you a subset of their DNA and removed things, then you cannot possibly ever be their peer. Do you see that? Unless
there's a mutation. I do see that.
Well, unless you get an augmentation or something so that you don't have that clamp. Well, that in and of itself is galactic slavery 101 that I think goes on.
Good point.
It goes on all over the galaxy. If you read about what bugs and blossoms were doing and how they were creating life forms to farm out to different planets based on what would adapt there and so on and so forth. So the idea of genetic creation is not a new concept in the galaxy. It may be shocking to us that somebody might have done it to us, but it's gone on. It's gone on all over the place. And I think it actually is the basis of many strategies that have been used by various races to augment the inhabitants of their planet to cause them to be more amenable to the ones that did it to them. You see what I'm saying? Oh yeah, we're your God. We created you, so you should really serve us and worship us and bring us food and make our clothes and dig out the Tigris and Euphrates and start mining the gold and build us missiles and all the other things that we ask you to do because we're your gods, right? and this comes down to me for me. Okay, like, okay, if a geneticist today was able to take their DNA and create a subset of it, grow it in a petri dish, and say, okay, I'm starting a new race, but it's going to be one with only, but they won't grow any hair, so I'll know they're mine. Okay, no hair on the head, blah blah blah. Right?
Right.
Do you see how this could go?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So next thing, well, this is what I think happened with the Anunnaki. I don't think there were multiple iterations of genetic fixes and stuff. And what you have to really ask yourself now, based on looking at them as a culture and a race from another location and their records and their technology, to a large extent, at least in function, we have become the Anunnaki. We are the Anunnaki. We're their offspring, and over time we've taken on their attributes, whether it was intentional or genetic, nature, nurture, doesn't really matter. That's why I kind of focus on them. Are there other races here? You bet. And I'm looking at those and trying to understand the relationship of the Anunnaki to them. And for the most part, I don't see any race that creates a subset species to do their bidding without some sort of trade-off. And this gets really, really deep. Okay, I actually wrote a piece of this in my screenplay about what does it really mean to be a slave. Okay, does it mean that you were put in a position that you were capable of doing a lot more and paid less? There's all these definitions. Are you in shackles, or are you doing it voluntarily because you can't do anything more than what you're functionally capable of doing? You understand what I'm saying? So in other words, what I thought you need to think about in general is all avatars of different capabilities and where they are on their spiritual path. And this is the part I think that has to do with the sun, soul, law spirit from the creator of all. You called it spirit, and then said the soul energy that animates the body is something different. I think that's true, and I think the word soul is very misunderstood. But the energy that's eternal is the one that I like to focus on. Okay, so I think an avatar can have energy from the creator of all that's at various stages in the potential range for manifestation and animation. There's another word for it other than animation, but a range of behavior that's going to get them from point A to point B in their lesson set that they have as their unique avatar. Okay, their spirit lessons. Okay, that are eternal, and that, because of that, it creates such a range of variability in awareness and consciousness that it looks, for all intents and purposes, that we're living in idiocracy and nobody ever gets out except for one or two every 100 years, right? Like really advanced spiritual people. And that may be true, but each of us get a little farther on that path, which is, from what I can tell, I mean, there are probably thousands of levels as you travel through the dimensions back to the source. Not dimensional levels, but levels in spiritual, conscious, and evolution. It's like a eternal school, where you've got to constantly be evolving. And I think ultimately you get to a place as a species where you can get along with others, have the recognition that there are other beings from other ways of social mores and galactic rules that are not the same as yours. And ultimately it brings up the point of, if two countries can't get along on this planet because they disagree on something, imagine how you're going to get along in something much more diverse, right?
Well, that's made me think oftentimes also about the supposed galactic federations that are out there. And there must be some type of galactic federations if there's a bunch of advanced races, I'm sure. But I also think about here on this planet, like you said, if two countries can't get along, then how are they going to be able to get along in space? So is that why they're pushing this one world system, one world agenda, attempting to fit everybody into this specific, one size fits all package, to where then they're like, okay, now that you've assimilated to the next level, well, then we can control you and you'll be easier to control in space. So we'll allow you to join this United Nations, but it's more like the galactic nations now. It's the next level. It just seems like it's a form of control. And I've also wondered, I want to get deep here for a minute.
No, I want to say I think that's partly right, and I think there are other aspects to it other than just going into space and being used as slaves and getting along with other races. I think there's also the spiritual dimension to it that involve the cycle masters that control the levels of consciousness in this dimension, according to the Emerald Tablets. And those cycle masters are responsible. Actually, the top one, the number 9, it says functionally that he's responsible for all the other levels, and that ultimately various dimensions in their process of going back to a closer place or state with the source, and we'll call that source the creator of all, that ultimately there's a management of these dimensions that merge. And so that would mean that we would meet our galactic neighbors, essentially, if that's true, right? Doesn't that make sense? So yeah, we could be being forced into a situation to face our differences and actually look for our commonalities that lead to a way to get along versus warring. So,
I also though see that this UN type system as being more of a control grid, more of an artificial matrix under a hierarchy that is essentially not source, not natural, not native, but artificial in essence. So it's the opposite spectrum that I would want to be a part of. I'd rather be Silver Surfer, enjoying the ride on my own and not having to worry about being put in some, 10 by 10 square foot box for the assimilation process and then having to go have the same ideas and wear the same clothes as everybody else, kind of like in the Star Trek Enterprise. You know what I mean? Which is cool, but that's just not my thing. So what I wonder, and I want to get deep here for a minute because this is stuff that used to really keep me up. When you really wonder about the possibilities of these beings and the abilities they have, the powers that they have, if they could be so powerful that they could be like planet killers, let's say. And let's say that a good way to symbolize the dark side would be what, if you were a Christian person, you would look at as the devil. Or if you're a specific religion, think of the adversary, the one in a negative fashion, not the one that you would want ruling over things, essentially. And imagine there being this anger and hate towards natural things, towards the natural level of things because of the ultimate creator, just this negative force towards that, the anti, in essence. So what if this thing had so much power that it literally just took out planet after planet, solar system after solar system, and it did it within specific structures? And what if it's trying to do that with Earth? And what happens if it's able to take over Earth in that essence? Is that what happened to Mars? Is there an underlying dark side in the entire universe, and we have to find some type of balance and protection to keep this system alive, to keep the game on, to keep us plugged in, to keep the power going, essentially?
Yeah, actually, that's funny you bring that up. I was watching a trailer for Dark Tower just yesterday. That's coming out.
Dark Tower? Is that the old Stephen King book?
Yeah, well, they've made it into a movie. Basically, it's this tower that represents a structure that stands between our dimension and some other dimension.
Okay.
And it's the same old concept, like what you're saying. Is there a function, a set of entities whose only responsibility is balancing destruction and creation, chaos and creation, right? And you look at what Thoth says he said in his Emerald Tablets that the seventh and eighth dimension were dimensions of chaos, that if they were not contained, they would basically destroy the lower dimension holograms. Okay, so I think there might be something to the creator of all establishing creative forces, destructive forces, and then forces that balance those two. Whoever that is, who's going to be the referee, right?
I look at Thoth oftentimes representing balance.
I see him that way too. I really see the cycle masters that clearly are working with the creator of all, and I think each dimension gets their own liaisons that do answer only to the higher dimensional creator of all. That's what they look like they are. Okay. And I think people and the entities that are kind of, I don't know, more evolved in their soul path, and whether it's Anunnaki or reptilian or whoever they are, it doesn't really matter. There's no such thing as a race that's all good or all bad. There's individuals that make up these races. Well, you have beings like that are mentioned, like Ahura Mazda and Zarathustra. Well, this was Enki and his this was the Enki and his son Ningshita in Persia, right? And everywhere these guys seem to be, that looked like paradise was going on. So you have to go, okay, well, these ones seem to make stuff that they decorate the house and treat the people like we like, right? From our social mores standpoint, we like that. The ones that are putting them in cuffs, jailing them, treating them like slaves, we don't like those ones. So we start dividing. Okay, here's the good guys and the bad guys. Does that mean the good guys were always good, and the bad guys were always bad? No. It was based on the situation, and good and bad are our labels that we look at it and say, well, relative to me, that's bad. See what I'm saying? So.
Well, it's absolutely a label, and for most people, I know myself, I see something as bad as hurting somebody else. And typically, if somebody has a conscience, they don't need religion or a book to tell them if they're doing something right or wrong. And one thing I will say that I do appreciate, I've had this gentleman by the name of Alexander on the show many times, and he's Jewish, and he's talked about his version of the scriptures and why he feels they are the way they are. And he said, well, scriptures are there for people that have no conscience, that can't think, that they can do whatever they want, but they read that scripture that says they can't do it, so they don't do it, which he made a good point there. And it also makes you wonder, what was it like thousands of years ago if people were walking around doing specific things that they just had no moral compass, I guess.
Yeah, actually, let's go back to Atlantis. This is a really great story because Solon, the wisest ruler of Greece at the time, wanted to know about the best solutions for managing and modeling government with the people. What's the best model? And he really thought what the Atlanteans had done was great based on his reading from the records. Okay, so that's why he was seeking out this idea. And they talked about Plato talks about in the Critias, I believe it was, where he's talking about how they governed themselves, and they had basic like councils of elders that they never had like a sitting government that was constantly churning laws. If your laws are changing, it means there's a problem. They were never good in the first place, all right? Because if you had a sound and ethical way to govern yourself, your laws won't be changing. It's one of the first indications that there's real problems with the government if the laws are churning all the time. Look at America; it's disgusting. Well, in Atlantis, according to them, the laws were public and inscribed on two twin pillars in a public place where everybody could see them. And we're not talking about long 1,000-page Obamacare bills, okay? This was something digestible, succinct, that worked for a very long time. As a matter of fact, if there was
I got an Obama phone, man. Don't make fun of that.
Well, go ahead and get it recharged because you're going to need it. Anyway, so they would not get together for a long time. And if anybody had an infraction, they would, the elders would be given the infraction. They discuss it over dinner. They would meditate on it overnight. And then depending on what I think there were 10 of them, what they submitted on a golden tablet in writing to the king and Poseidon himself was their recommendation. They weren't playing the judge. Only Poseidon got to do that. So they had very little crime. Okay,
no,
very
little crime. Poseidon
Enki? Yes, Poseidon is Enki. The dweller of Atlantis was none other than Poseidon Enki. That's right.
That's cool.
That is cool. It's the same one listed in this document you have right open in front of you. Isn't that bizarre? So you go back and read about the Emerald Tablets where he's talking about the creation of Atlantis, when it happened, and how the dweller, his father, did it using the power of Yolton, where he could manifest matter from his mind. And Thoth talks about other civilizations he came into a counter with that had overcome the need for what he called toil, manual labor to do stuff. They could just use the power of creative force they were given clearly by the creator of all to deal with material issues in the simulator. And apparently some of us can do that too. I think that's cool.
I wonder if that was the case, then why they just wouldn't go that route instead of doing the GMO on the Earthlings.
Well, this is where it gets complicated. It's pretty clear to me that there was a battle over consciousness, and that and Enki was a lower rank than Enlil, and when the council made the decision to replace the Gigi, he had an opportunity to do something that I think was absolutely the most exciting part of our story. And that was to play some genetic games that ultimately would lead to a species that adhered to the tenets that he viewed as permanent from the creator of all. And he had his discussions with the seven cycle masters. As a matter of fact, in the destruction of Atlantis, once the men who got together and summoned the dark entities from the lower dimensions, which Thoth clearly lays out, there were 14 of them, 14 lower dimensions. When they were brought forth, the only way Enki, Poseidon, the dweller, could deal with what had happened, he went to the halls of Amenti, approached the cycle masters, and asked them to induce what to close the portal. Did you remember? He asked them to induce a wobble in the earth that would flood the portal and close it out and eliminate those who came through that portal from the lower dimension. That's what he did. That's crazy, dude. And it's in the record. That's what he said happened.
One thing I got to jump in on again, because I don't think that you answered this question, or you might have, and I might have missed it. So remember when Ishtar says she's going to open up the gates of hell?
Right.
What is the gates of hell? What is hell? Is this dimension? And if so,
well, they had a concept of a differentiation of your energy and your matter. Remember we talked about the Atrahasis, where Enki took the Ajiji, took his energy out and put it into the body. Well, they also had a concept of a holding area for energy that had not been manifested into an avatar body yet. And they called it by several names. And they actually discussed going there. And I think I even saw one in this list that you had right here. There's a discussion of Inanna going to visit the Hades, or the underworld, that was controlled by Ereshignal and and Nergal. Nergal and Ereshignal were given the task of controlling this repository of energy. In Greece, they called it Hades. Okay, this is the same place that they're talking about. It's the same place, I believe, that Jesus Ningshita visited in the Bible, where there's a repository of energy that can be put into avatars at their beck and call. This is the crazy, crazy part that probably created the concept of what we call hell, or this holding area that the Anunnaki seem to have. Okay, and there's actually a story, I thought you read it, where Inanna she wanted to go to recover, I believe it was Dumuzi from the netherworld, and she had to go through the 7 gates, and all her clothes and all her jewelry were taken. Do you remember reading that one? I thought it was you that read that.
Man, you're putting me on the spot.
Oh, it's okay. It's in the record, but she actually went.
What's the name of the book?
Well, just look up, it's called Inanna's Journey to the Underworld or the Netherworld, and I'll find it and give it to you. But yeah, it's a pretty famous one. And actually, the idea that she actually had something to do with the death of Dumuzi, who was one of Enki's kids, who ended up also spending half his time at this underworld place, and then as the vegetation god, he would come back the other half of the year and show up in the spring. So that was Tammuz Dumuzi, who was one of Enki's sons as well. So he had a lot of discussion about this interaction with this underworld, whatever it is. But actually, it was also represented by 2 caves in Persia as well. It was a concept that Ahura Mazda himself had under Zoroastrianism. So it's very, very significant, this idea, this one of creation and this one of destruction or holding, represented by 2 caves.
Remember when you told me about the two pillars in Atlantis that held the laws?
Yeah.
What are the laws? Do you know?
Actually, I think the laws were summarized in the Critias by Plato himself, and so much so that he even talked about the ritual where they went through the laws, found the infraction. It wasn't complicated laws. It was more like what you would expect from a divine ruler that gave you a range of possibilities to operate within, as long as you were headed toward the goal of building a eternal character based on permanent attributes, not seeking wealth, greed, or base qualities that ended up being part of what brought Atlantis down in the first place. So as long as you operated within those guidelines, you were good to go. So it wasn't really like a lot of authoritarianism. It was very philosophical guidelines. Some of them were very clear about not killing another being or anything like that. Actually, you might be able to find them. To read about the Critias, Critaeus, or Plato in Atlantis. It usually comes up. So, but anyway, I suggest you dig into that one if you really like it. And actually, the part of it that really stuck with me was Zeus's role in the final reading where the tablet was torn up. So the account wasn't complete. Well, it ended when Atlantis started coming apart with this base behavior from these beings that were power hungry, and they also said there was genetic mixing that led to the loss of the connection with the gods. So there was there was kind of looked like a genetic war going on to pervert the beings in Atlantis that ended up being identified as the ones that brought in the sons of Belial from the lower dimension, that are the parasitic hosts that you refer to as the archons. Okay, and this is why I wanted to distinguish that. The archons were Anunnaki, whereas the serpent beings that Thoth talks about, the serpent race, that doesn't mean they looked reptilian, okay? As a matter of fact, they were not even visible to the human eye. They cannot be visualized in our visual spectrum, according to him. But they could occupy a body. They usually sought out beings in high places. And these are the ones that are really talked about in the movie They Live. Okay? Parasitic hosts that steal souls and use them for some other race's purpose. Are you with me?
Oh, I am, and I just want to make a point on the archons that you brought that up because we were talking off the air about this.
Yeah.
And so the archons, most people, when they think of the archons, they refer to the Nag Hammadi, because that's where the name archon nowadays, at least most people, that's what they connect. John Lash came out several years ago and started talking about the archons, and that's where I first heard about him. He said, read the book of John in Nag Hammadi. So I read the scriptures. And one of the things that I find fascinating is the description of Yahweh is very similar to that. I mean, the similar of Yaldabaoth is very similar to Yahweh. Very, very, very similar. And the way that he's described, though, the way that he looks is interesting, because the description of Yaldabaoth, the chief archon, the chief ruler, is a lion head with a serpent body. And he is essentially the redheaded stepchild, because once he's created by Sophia, she's like, oh, nope, I made a mistake. I didn't make you with my husband, so I gotta shun you. And then he creates a bunch of other archons, and then they create Adam and Eve with their demons, with a bunch of demons too. And this is based on, Jewish Kabbalah type stuff, Gnosticism, etc. Here's the kicker, though. Here's what I find fascinating, is the underlying theme of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, of the Book of Enoch, of the Sumerian tablets, the Sumerian scribes, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis, and many of these other scriptures of antiquity that I've read that predate the Bible. Well, then you read the Bible again, and you're like, holy cow, this is just like a calcified, a fluorinated version, a little bit calmer version without a lot of the details of some of these Sumerian translations, which actually these Sumerian translations, I mean, they could actually be talking about taking a translation that predates them as well. And I think that's obviously the case with the Sumerians, Kings List, etc. It's just incredible. It's absolutely incredible. The more research I do, the more scriptures that I read of prophecy, when you look at it from a different aspect of like an engineer mindset, as somebody that's looking at it in politics and science versus religion and God, it makes a lot more sense. It's incredible.
Agreed. It's incredible, but at the same time, it brings you to this place where you realize what you're up against, and you basically have some decisions to make. You can put your head in the sand, go along, get along, be a good slave, and probably get recycled over and over and over again. How many past lives do you think each of us have had? Right? It may be a special time right now that people are waking up in mass versus just one or two every 100 years, that kind of thing. So anyway, I think the thing that we can do now is recognize what state we're in and collaborate and be, and like you said, be the change we want to see, because we can change what we can, and there are certain things that the seeds have already been sown, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And we got to figure out where that line is to be good with both of those without losing hope as a species, because we're facing some pretty dastardly challenges right now, which I think you're well aware of.
So I see things as being cyclical, and it's like cycles within cycles, fractals within fractals. And we're on this very interesting path right now. I hope that we're not going into a global war. I certainly am wondering about why there was an emergency meeting. I mean, the media can spin anything, but the media comes out and says there's an emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace and the Queen's getting all of her staff together. And then the next day they're like, oh, well, it's just because Prince Philip's stepping down here in a few weeks or in a couple months. I don't buy the official version. That's obviously what they're telling the public. I think there's something more to it than that. That's after Trump calls the entire, who did he call? Congress into the White House or something like that, or the House or the Senate. No, he called the Senate into the White House, all of them, for an emergency meeting previously. There's this incredible saber rattling going on right now. And with all the media pushing North Korea, I think North Korea is going to be the next Iraq. It's the same thing I'm seeing pre-2001. Now, but this one might even be deeper. This might even be a larger scale war, not as much of a proxy war, because we've kind of been in a global war since 2001, if you really think about it. Not like in World War II and World War I, yet many countries are at war. Is it full World War? No. So maybe not World War, but it's still we've been at war for, since how long now? Feeding the machine? And let me ask you this, too. Let's get deep for a second here. Do you think that this constant perpetual war state that the U.S. has been in for decades is literally to feed some type of archon, the archon that you're talking about? And could there be archons controlling Anunnaki, these serpent beings controlling the Anunnaki, without them knowing about it?
Well, you kind of open a whole bunch of can of worms. First of all, I think there's an alliance between the Anunnaki and a faction of the Anunnaki, clearly, that was referred to as the Dark Brothers. That's how Thoth talks about them. I guess that could be one, two, or hundreds for all I know. It could be a whole clan that he's referring to that have aligned with those beings to basically assert worldwide control, to global domination. That's what they want. And these factional infightings use a lot of different methods. Proxy armies in the form of parasitic hosts to mind control equipment that could be operated from low Earth orbit satellites, for instance. So it's all over the board. The war for the hearts and minds and the slave labor of the avatars on the surface of the planet is epic. And it's not new, like you said. I don't think we took the question where you wanted it to go, though. What's the focus that you want to get to on that question?
Do you think that there's going to be a war with North Korea?
Oh, well,
because you brought up a bunch of stuff earlier that we haven't even touched on.
Yeah, I know. It was kind of a sensitive issue. I spent a year practically living on the DMZ in North Korea when I was young, and I saw a lot of stuff that most people that haven't been there don't see. And there's a whole history of conflagration that's gone on there that if you really go back and to find out the source of it, you might be surprised that it wasn't about the North and South fighting, that there was an outside foreign agent stirring them up, okay, which has gone on in many other places since then. So it starts to become the view of a puzzle of a pattern of behavior that's been going on since, in the United States, well, almost continuously since the end of World War II. I mean, the number of countries whose presidents have been puppeteered and replaced exceeds 50, and the number of wars and skirmishes has almost been perpetual. It's unbelievable. And then at the height of hypocrisy, you go, whoa, Iran's a problem. You know, we got to put Iran in our targets. Well, look at the past 212 years. How many wars has Iran been in? And who have they threatened? And really, for that matter, the same goes for North Korea. Nobody could hold a candle to the amount of global bullying, hegemony, and world domination that the United States has done under the sign of the eagle since World War II. No one.
You want to hear something interesting on that note?
So is there going to be war with North Korea? You bet there is. And this is not going to be the same as before, because it's not just North Korea. It's the entire BRICS nations that are going to get drawn into this. So you're talking World War.
So I sure hope not. There's just so many signs that are pointing that direction. Now, there's a gal that's on the show on occasion. Her name's Heidi Vandenberg. She does these Vedic star charts, which I'm doing a lot of research on the Vedas now as well. It's interesting to get another aspect of these ancient texts and the wars that they talk about and stuff. But that's a whole other episode. Well, these star charts, it's literally like DNA from the stars. Like the accuracy from these star charts of what somebody's life path is like, the trials and tribulations, what their morals oftentimes even can be like. Not always, but it's crazy how eerie she can be.
I know.
So, let me add to that just real quick before I lose track here. So she did a star chart on the day that the U.S. was founded, and it was creepy. I mean, it was dark. It was an extremely dark star chart correlating to the exact date of the corporation, the beast machine, the dark beast, because there's good beasts out there. Well,
yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, the whole founding of America is such a crazy thing. And I think Francis Bacon is a good place to start about the new Atlantis that he envisioned from happening in America. But I don't know. It's a multifaceted experimental mess that, if you really get to the bottom of it, it ultimately comes down to contracts with other races to achieve certain things, trading technology for resources and access and protection, all those kind of things that the majority of the population never had any knowledge of and has been a victim of for a very, very long time. You know, it's like, who are these people to be making secret oaths, secret covenants with another race, let alone another country in secret, another race that has to do with the future and spiritual path and free will choice of an entire species? I mean, that's hubris like you can't even imagine.
Well, and that's why I brought up the planet killer thing earlier. Is because it's you wonder, you look at Mars and you look at how there's a possibility, you know, it's the planet of war. Well, did they do that to Mars? And let me jump back to, though, I want to talk about the 7th and 8th dimensions of chaos. If we could talk about the cycle masters, and also I really want to read, and I want to do a podcast on this, that specific meditation you told me about. It's like a prayer to Thoth, of protection, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that'd be neat to talk about also before we close out. And also another thing later I want to discuss.
That might be a whole other show.
Well, okay. But real quick, too, and I do want you to, before we close out tonight, share with us also at the end, after you answer a couple of those questions, please, your movie that you're working on, because that's awesome, too. So I just don't want to forget about that.
Okay. So you want to... Which one do you... Well, I think we already brought up the 7 cycle masters. So you look at Emerald Tablet 6 and 7.
Okay.
It tells you who they are, what their functions are, and how they fit in relative to Thoth's model of our dimensional reality. I call it the holographic universe model, but it's how he sees the dimensions broken up relative to the races and how it all fits together in coincidence with this very important being they call the creator of all. And he does give massive deference to this being. You know, people will ask, well, who do the Anunnaki worship? Because they're not God, right? Well, they give clear deference, at least the ones that are kind of on a spiritual path, it seemed like Thoth and his father and a few of the others. That doesn't mean to say they all are not on the spiritual path, but the ones that seemed oriented on more permanent, galactic, infinite knowledge, stuff that just doesn't change over time. Those are the ones that I really got a kick out of and focused on. So in Emerald Tablet 6, Emerald Tablet 7, he lays out who these cycle masters are, that are ancient beings that don't even need a body, that basically occupy the halls of Amente, according to Thoth. And they're always there. They don't go anywhere. But apparently they can have liaison with beings from other higher dimensions, maybe galactic councils, or the creator of all itself, himself, herself, in totality. Call it source, whatever. So that's possible as well. And it seems like part of the control structure for the hologram is that happens by default. Well, if that's the case, and you come into a system that's created as a hologram, it's clear that in order to do things in that system, you got to coordinate with them. They're not called the cycle masters. I call them the wobble cops and consciousness cops. They establish what the range of energy that can be converted into consciousness is allowed in that dimension as part of the infinite being having a material experience trying to evolve back to the source. That's pretty much the game. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's these guys' role. Well, it's clear that Poseidon, Enki, has to work with them. He mentions it, that he had to coordinate doing something to this planet to close a portal and cause a massive flood with them. Okay, he couldn't do that on his own. And I also brought up a very important part, and we'll get to that in the screenplay just a little bit here, is that the idea of creating a genetic race that operated in accordance with the tenets, the permanent tenets, the attributes, the characteristics that the creator of all intended. I believe Enki put that in his creation, us, and that's referred to as this sun soul or Ba energies that he talks about. And Thoth lays this out in detail, distinguishing the types of energy that make up humans. And I talk about that in my Seven Planet Mercury Rising. So you wanted to know about how this particular ritual that Thoth mentions in Emerald Tablet 6 relates to the cycle masters and the battle between light and dark. This is epic, okay? This is like Star Wars, except go back before Star Wars. This is like eternal, this battle, okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat.
Well, I put out my Emerald Tablets from my audiobook as a YouTube video. And I have one where it's the entire text, and I just read it, and there's no commentary, okay? That one's on YouTube on my playlist. But in Emerald Tablet 6, and I have it partially memorized because I've seen it so many times, he basically tells you there's ways you can protect yourself from the Dark Brothers and the stuff that they've been doing to the primitive worker slaves forever. And here's what it is. And he tries to lay it out scientifically about, if you had to say what the first method was, you would call it meditating and clearing your own energy, okay, through visualization. That's the first method he gives you. But he goes, if you've already gotten too inundated by a parasitic host that's trying to turn you into darkness inside out, and you just can't generate your own energy to free yourself from this bad frequency, then he goes, well, here's one that you can use. And he says, don't use it just for yourself either. Use it for your brother who's enslaved in darkness too. And that's the one I think you're referring to. And a lot of people read this and they go, oh my God, this is scary. I can't say these words and say these beings' names. This is like cultish, right? Well, when you finally understand from a overall scientific model of who these entities are, yes, they're given a label. He actually gives them two labels. He gives them the label 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 as their sequence of dimensional assignment, which if you add that up, that's 7 of them. So we go from dimension 3 to dimension 9 among their leaders. Even though there were 9 of them, we only have 7 of them in the halls of Lamented. Okay? So he calls them by number, but he also calls them by name. And I think that's what you're referring to. So according to Thoth, and I won't go through it all right now, but if you use their names and state what he asks you to state, you can enroll these cycle masters, just like Enki did, the dweller of Atlantis, enrolled them to remove dimensional forces that came into this reality from a lower dimension by closing their portal. He coordinated that with them. So whenever you're doing something to affect the evolution of a species or access to consciousness, I believe the cycle masters are involved. Okay, so he names them Untanos, Huertas, Chieto, Goyana, Huertas, Sembetal, and Ardal. Okay, and Ardal is number 9. Well, each one of these beings, according to the Hindu tradition, is mapped to a ganglion of consciousness or a chakra that controls your consciousness. So they actually give them Hindu god names. So we have a third name for these guys. And by the way, the Emerald Tablets make it very clear that their job, and each one of them maps to a chakra in your body. So Untanos maps to your first chakra, even though he's cycle master number 3. Okay? You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And Ardal maps to your crown chakra, which is your pineal gland, not your pituitary gland. Okay? So your third eye is right between your eyes, is your pituitary gland. Your crown chakra is your pineal gland that sits deep in the recesses of the brain, right at the top. Okay, so people confuse those a lot. They're not the same. But Ardal is the one that maps to the crown chakra, which is your pineal gland that pretty clearly produces dimethyltryptamine that we believe is some sort of chemical wave-producing agent that allows transduction of electrical energy as brain waves to thoughts and back and forth to the electromagnetic spectrum. So I believe it's a chemical transducer for frequency that is connected to quote unquote the gods. So that's why I believe Dr. Straussman called it the spirit molecule, is that it allows you to have that experience. And I think it's built in us. And I think ultimately getting that top chakra to work has to be done in conjunction with Ardal through your spiritual and physical tests, and probably a lot of work to get your energy body to be at its optimal state. You know, a yogi could spend their entire life and not get their pineal gland to fire. Maybe they didn't know there was fluoride in the water or all the other impediments, but the yogic path was designed to activate the crown chakra. That's what it's for.
That's incredible. The mapping of everything. And that also makes me think about the Anunnaki calls that I've been doing a lot of research into lately. I actually did the 19th call today in a Phoenician language, which was extremely difficult. I had to write it out to where, because if it's spelled E or I, those have different sounds versus the English. And so I just had to basically write it all out and then say it a few times before I actually did it. And I did a fair job from never learning from anybody how to do it. But I'm telling you, the energy levels were phenomenal. Like,
yeah, well, that's what you want to play with, dude. When you find out that you can breathe a certain way, you can access your higher energy states. You'll go through a place where you get scared, and then you go back and you realize that it was a transient experience. You want it all the time, so you might try drug to get there. But ultimately, that higher consciousness state that can be achieved with activating your ultimately, if you can get to your crown chakra, most people in this life, I have to say, will probably never get much beyond their second or third chakra and they're going to have to be working at it to get that. Okay, because it's not easy. It's part of learning who you are, and knowing thyself is knowing what makes you up and how you get to the optimal state. Okay, so that doesn't mean you should give up and not try, because any state you get that's farther than where you were is better. That's the way it's set up. It's always learning and growing and evolving, trying to go back to the ultimate place where you're a true replication of the source. Because when you start operating that way, then the world changes around you.
Absolutely. And one of the neat things about those calls is the actual vibrations that the sounds make, right? So that's what I noticed is a really cool energy, almost like a vibrating energy. I mean, the garage was literally just, it was pretty fascinating. So when you think about it, everything breaks down to a frequency, which a word is a frequency. So I can't wait to dive into these tablets, and I love your books, man. I mean, I'll tell you, if anybody goes to Gerald Clark 77.com. I'm sorry, I was about to say leakproject.com, but I was talking about your website. Go to geraldclark77.com. You guys, you can pick up a really nice vinyl scroll that's heavy duty. That's what I like to call the genealogy of the gods, because it's got so many different key connections. And then also, if you use the code LeakProject, you'll get a 10% discount. Pick up the seventh planet, Mercury Rising. I think that's so far your magnum opus, Gerald. That's a great.
Yeah, well, my chapter 5 in that book is all 15 of the Emerald Tablets. People always ask me, where can I get the Emerald Tablets? Well, I also like to promote Doriel, who was one of the people involved with that from the White Temple. Okay, but I actually have them in the entire Emerald Tablets in chapter 5 with my analysis, and my analysis is pretty extensive. And so, but like I said, that's not the whole book. There's a whole lot more to the seventh planet Mercury Rising than chapter 5. And one thing I want to say before we leave on this energy thing and Emerald Tablet number 6, do look up how to activate your Ba energy. That's one of the key things you have to do in this life. Start ascending along this path. And it really, it's like living in two different worlds. Like there's heaven and hell going on simultaneously. Choose which one you want to be part of, right? And they happen simultaneously. So activating this Ba energy, this latent potential energy that's coiled up in like the Kundalini energy that's represented in yoga, in your ganglion of Impar, in your tailbone of all places. And listen, your coccyx bone is surrounded by the sacrum. Do you know that means sacred bone? Well, it has a lot to do with the frequency resonation that happens in that chamber, and I've done a lot of analysis of this, where I essentially call those meat modems, and there are very complex energy and matter interactions that happen with the human body and are talked about by Thoth that have to do with your sending and receiving energy that is eternal. Okay, energy is never created or destroyed; it's eternal. It just changes state. Well, avatars change state, right? So we're in our meat modem avatar state right now, but we are eternal energies. And I talk a lot about that in the seventh planet Mercury Rising, and bring into account what Thoth got from the Creator Ball, the handbook, the Bible, or the handbook for life for an avatar on this planet. He lays it out there for you what the Creator Ball expects, what attributes we were given from the Creator Ball, and how to use those to move. And what Thoth wants you to do is use that information he's given you and do exactly what he did in his path. That's what he's encouraging you to do. He doesn't want to be your God. He wants to be your initiator so you can do what he did. And when you start realizing who this being is, you'll start to see very, very close similarities with Ningshita, Thoth, Hermes, Mercury, Buddha, Confucius, Enoch, and Melchizedek, and the being that we call Jesus as well. You'll start to see that it's not allegorical stories told for uneducated people in his Emerald Tablets. This was scientific, cosmic, eternal knowledge that were given to his priests, not for the lay population. Okay, so it does require you to study it more than once. He tells you to read it 100 times if that's necessary, but that's that important. And so that's why I included it in my book. It did make the book a little thicker, but I thought it was worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate you doing that. And also your book, The Anunnaki of Nibiru, that is an excellent read. Your wife has a great website as well, artisticvegan.com, and she's got really good cooking books. As a matter of fact, I've got the cooking book, and we ended up making some miso soup the other day out of the book. It was delicious, so I appreciate that. And in closing out tonight, Gerald, last few minutes we have, please give a shout out to the movie that you're putting together.
Okay. Yeah.
More. Where do they go?
Well, I put a video on my YouTube site talking about how this story came to be. There you go. Anunnaki Genesis to Odyssey Key. So, I started writing the Anunnaki Nibiru, and that ultimately led to people wanting the story told in a bigger venue. I never really thought of making a movie or being a storyteller, to be honest with you, as an engineer. But one thing led to another, and so I kind of explained it in that video, how it came to be. But I'll give you kind of a snapshot. So right now, I have a GoFundMe campaign started to fund a small team to produce the trailer. I have about 3 or 4 people right now that if I can get some money and lock them down with their time, that I think we can knock this out very quickly. The trailer is for a movie, a full 2-hour movie, 120-page screenplay, and it also is for a TV series, which I've already written 30 episodes in the outline, 3 seasons of 10 episodes per year. And the thing that's really the most surprising to me is going through all this process of learning how to make a movie, mixing the CGI, green screening, compositing, doing the special effects. And ultimately, I completely overlooked the idea of ever allowing myself to get involved in the gaming industry. And I'm not sure why. When I was in the military, we did complex simulations all the time, even 3D simulators that you would climb in the cockpit and fly them, like simulators. So, but I was never really a hardcore gamer, I guess, like my kids were. So I didn't really get it. But everybody had asked me, why don't you consider making a game to tell this story? Because you'll reach a younger audience. And for the first time this year, I guess it is, I finally took the time to look at what's involved in doing that and where the gaming industry is. And I got so excited, I downloaded Unreal Engine. And I know there's a lot of gamers out there that know what that is. And we're going to look at that. And I'm going to try to put together a team to get some Unreal Engine developers and produce episodic games that tell the story as well, with all the characters and all the scene sets that we're using for the movie and the TV set. So I'm definitely down for that. And it's a whole nother push, though. But and it may be a separate funding campaign. But right now, I'm definitely involved with people who have experience doing that. And I think reaching the youth, that would be a good way to do it.
Yeah, that's great, Gerald. Good luck with that. You've also got a really nice YouTube channel. So, ladies and gentlemen, make sure to subscribe to Gerald Clark's YouTube channel also, and GeraldClark77.com. Make sure to use the code LeakProject for a 10% discount. And if you haven't already, subscribe to LeakProject.com. Sometimes not everybody gets all the updates when I do a new podcast. And sometimes I do 4, sometimes I do 6, sometimes I do 8 podcasts a day. And if you want to get access to all the updates, make sure to subscribe also to LeakProject.com. Right now, we're doing a promotion where for only $50 for the entire year, you'll get access to all podcasts, downloadable, streamable. We've got about 700 podcasts right now, growing very fast. Your contributions greatly help us here at Leak Project. And thank you for all your support, everybody. Make sure to share these far and wide. Also, if you go to youtube.com/Clandestine Time Lord, you can always watch podcasts for free on there. We don't have every single podcast on youtube.com/Clandestine Time Lord. We do have exclusive podcasts on Leak Project. If I could make them free for everybody, I absolutely would. However, I do have quite a bit of expenses keeping the website up. And anyway, that's my shameless plug. You guys are awesome. Thanks for being here with us. Gerald, you're awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, brother. I'm glad we got together, and back to the Cartoon Network or Cartoon Cavern. And I know you got more shows to do, so we'll cross paths again, and I'm sure have more to say.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gerald. And keep being the change you want to see. I will keep being the change I want to see. Ladies and gentlemen, be the change you want to see.